Hello, everybody. Jonathan Weibel here with another episode of Politics with Jonathan. And today we are starting up sort of a new series, but sort of a continuation of what I'm already doing. But this time with the Senate elections, I really wanted to go back to the beginning of when this was the first election that all of the senators were elected by popular vote. Some of them had been in the past couple, but this was the first one where they all were. And I want to cover all of these Senate elections because I have not found a lot of good Senate content on YouTube, particularly when it comes to these elections, content that really covers it in depth, and I hope to do that. And of course, Henry Cabot Lodge was actually the first majority leader, and Oscar Underwood was only minority leader. He never became majority leader, and let's get started because this one will take a while. Okay, so we can scroll through all of this. We have our first Senate election in Alabama. John H. Bankhead won with 100% of the vote. He served from '07 until his death in 20, so he died in office. And then Arkansas' Joseph T. Robinson won again with 100% of the vote. He was the majority leader from 1933 to 1937. He died in office again, so we have a two-in-a-row streak of dying in office. And Colorado, this is the first flip for the GOP. This was against incumbent Senator John F. Safroth and then Lawrence C. Phipps, who was the Denver businessman. And yeah, there isn't too much information about this. The Prohibition candidate did get 2.58% of the vote, which is a okay showing. Lawrence C. Phillips ended up winning by about a 1.5% margin, and he served until 1919 and 1931. I believe I'm correct there. Yes, I am correct there. And now we have the 1918 Senate election in Delaware, and this was another flip against William Salisbury Jr., who served from 13 to 19. That's interesting. He was the pro tempore of the Senate. And L. Heisler Ball, who ended up winning by about 3 points, I believe. Yeah, he was a representative from Delaware's at large from '01 to '03, and he served only one full term from 1925. And now we have the Senate election in Georgia with William J. Harris and Z.H. Williams. William J. Harris won with 88% of the vote. And I should also say, before I get too deep into this, that about a century ago, in case some of my audience doesn't know, the South was incredibly Democratic and the North was incredibly Republican. So if you see some of these results and are like, this doesn't make much sense, that's why. And now we have William Borah against Frank Elmore, and William Borah was the senator from Idaho from 1907 to 1940, and he ended up winning with 67% of the vote compared to Frank Elmore's 32%. Now we have the special election. As you can see, this was a much less partisan time. John F. Nugent served from 18 to 21, I believe. He only won the special term, if his profile will come up. Yeah. And Frank R. Gooding, who was I believe he was the former governor. I think, yeah, he was the former governor to '05 to '09. He eventually served once the special election was over. Once the full term came up. But John F. Nugent ended up winning by 1 point. And now we have another flip, which is, if it'll load, Medium McCormick versus J. Hamilton Lewis. Lewis had been serving since 1913 and 1919, and Medium McCormick ended up running against another congressman, George Edmund Foss, and William Hill Thompson, mayor of Chicago. He ended up winning that primary, and he ended up winning the general election, and that's pretty funny. Socialists and socialist labor are both on the ballot along with Prohibition. Funny that both socialists were. And he ended up serving from, only one term, 19 to 25. Oh no, he actually died in office. That's unfortunate. We have another death in office. How old was he? He looks so young in his photograph. Oh, he was only 47. Wow. And J. Hamilton Lewis actually ended up serving again from 31 to 39, and he was majority leader from 33 to 39. Oh, he was actually majority leader before then. Wait, no. I got that wrong. He was majority whip. Sorry, everybody. And Iowa, we have William S. Kenyon versus Charles R. Keyes. I believe we actually have a bit of information. He graduated from State University of Ohio. Keyes ended up winning with 65% compared to No, Kenyon won with 65% of the vote compared to Keyes' 34%. Okay. And he ended up resigning his Senate seat to become a judge for the Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit. And now we have another flip, Arthur Capper and William Howard Thomas. He had been serving since 1913. Sometimes Wikipedia is just very weird about pulling up the information. And Capper ended up winning by, 30 points. Oh, yeah, he served for 30 years. He was in the Senate for a while. Did he die in office? Nope. He did not die in office, surprisingly enough. So, yeah, Thompson did not seem too popular. Kansas seemed very eager to give him the boot. And now we have Kentucky with Augustus O. Stanley and Ben Brunner. And this is an interesting election because Ollie M. James sought a second term, but he died on August 18th. So he was replaced by Governor Augustus Osley Stanley. And the other senator at the time, J.C.W. Breckham, really liked him running because he challenged him in 1914 and he really didn't want him to in 20. I presume it was probably a close race then. Ben Brunner had some interesting opinions. He ran a campaign opposed to the prohibition of alcohol and in favor of a bill banning the German language, which Stanley had vetoed as governor. Yeah, that's very interesting that you run on banning the German language. I can understand being against prohibition because some were against, some were for it. But banning the German language, very interesting. And now we have Joseph E. Ranzel, who served from 13 to 31. He ended up winning with 100% of the vote. Same with Edward James Gay Jr., who served from, he only served 2 years. Now we have Bert F. Renaud and Elmer E. Newbert. Elmer E. Newbert, was the Maine state treasurer from 15 to 16. And he ended up winning by about a 10-point margin, so he did pretty well. He served from 16 to 26, and he died in office. And now we have Massachusetts, and this is an interesting one. So this was against David I. Walsh, John W. Meeks, and Thomas W. Lawson. David I. Walsh was a governor at the time. John W. Meeks served from, only since 1913. And John W. Meeks, was a staunch critic of Wilson, a very conservative critic, and he continuously talked about he criticized Wilson with the American war involvement grew, calling Secretary of War Newton Baker a pacifist by nature and publicly calling the president's management of material and domestic coal into question. So he definitely was not Wilson's biggest fan. And the progressives really wanted Samuel W. McCall to come in to challenge him because he narrowly lost on the 31st ballot, as you can see here in the 1913 race. And he was the governor of Massachusetts at the time, and he also was a former rep from 93 to 13. He ended up running. He criticized Weeks as one of a class of senators who represents capital over the interest of the people. Of course, he was running as a progressive, so he was all about the people and the people's power. And he also accused Weeks of vote buying for hosting dinners for various ethnic societies. But his campaign was aggressive but surprisingly brief. He withdrew by the end of the month, which was pretty interesting. Yeah, and his decision was made upon determination that the conservative W. Murray wing of the party remained loyal to Weeks and would ensure his renomination. So he basically saw no path forward. David I. Walsh ended up winning. And Walsh, let's see here. Walsh responded to the implicit criticism that he had Weeks, that he had obstructed the war effort. I do not know of a man in the Senate who wants to do anything that might in any way interfere with the war's progress, but while conceding that government by dictation is necessary, I'm not ready to abdicate my rights to form my own judgments. So he basically was trying to dance around the issue here. And Governor McCall refused to campaign for Weeks in the general election, which is pretty interesting because they're of the same party. and McCall, thereby deprived Weeks, considered a drab speaker of his widely regarded oratory talent. So, not as a bit confusing to me that Weeks wasn't able to put up a better fight since he was a pretty good orator, at least from what it says here. He ended up being defeated by about 20,000 votes. And I believe he was the Democrats' only flip. I may be wrong there. I'll check once this video is over. Oh yeah, Thomas W. Lawson was a stock promoter. He ended up getting about 5% of the vote. Pretty good performance. Yeah, Weeks lost pretty badly by 4.5 points. And now we have the Senate election in Michigan. This is another very interesting one against Truman, Newberry, and Henry Ford. So Henry Ford, of course, I think you all know him from Ford Motors. I believe that's what he's from. Yeah, Ford Motor Company. You all can see I'm pretty tired here because I was actually recording this video. I was 15 minutes into it, and then I realized, oh, my mic isn't plugged in all the way. Yeah, so I'm having to record all of this again, but I quite enjoy this content. Anyway, Henry Ford was actually pretty interesting here because he challenged Truman Handy Newberry in both the Republican primary and he also ran in the Democratic primary. And let's see here. He criticized Newberry for his excessive campaign spending and declared that Newberry should not be nominated because if elected, there would be no difficulty for Democrats to prove that he had obtained his seat illegally. Oh, actually, this is the newspapers. My mistake. And, oh yeah, I should also mention that Arlen E. Sleeper really did not like William Alden Smith, who was the current senator, and he really wanted Truman Handy Newberry to run for Smith's seat. So when you know the governor is against you of your own party, things weren't looking too good for you. So we ended up winning the primary against Henry Ford by about 18 points. And of course, Henry Ford was actually endorsed by Woodrow Wilson before he yeah, as soon as he announced, even in the Republican primary, he was endorsing him. And Newberry ran an extravagant campaign. Primarily, spending became a focus of the general election campaign. In an open letter published September 17th, ex-Governor Osborne congratulated Newberry on his victory and pledged his support, but it urged Newberry to confess that he had knowingly broken campaign finance laws without realizing the enormity of his offense. So that is pretty funny here that the former governor, I take it he was of his own party, was telling him, hey, you really need to fess up and own up to this. And just so you all know, he actually got kicked out of the Senate for stuff like this. He only served 4 years. Well, he wasn't officially kicked out, but he resigned. And I believe that's all. Truman Handy Newberry ended up winning against Henry Ford by about 1.7, and this was actually challenged later because Ford initially declined to seek a recount, but later he decided to seek a recount, and he went to the Privileges and Elections Senate Committee, where Ford's counsel asked for an immediate investigation and recount, claiming that Newberry had only acknowledged a fraction of his spending and had actually spent $500,000 in the primary campaign. And it ended up passing by one Republican vote, then January 27th. Charles E. Townsend accused Ford of running the most elaborate, expensive, and pretentious campaign in the history of the state, and of course, improper and unlawful practices. He won a Republican stronghold by 35,000 votes. He denied the charges in an emphatic language as parliamentary rules will permit, and it was ultimately conceded that no challenge could be made to seating Newberry until he had actually received his credentials from Senator Smith on March 3rd, and then it ended up being dismissed a couple of months later. So very interesting. Then there's a not critical, I'm sorry, you all can see I'm pretty tired here. There was a criminal investigation, and then he resigned 4 years later. And now we have Newt Nelson versus Willis Collarwood from the National Party. I don't know too much about the National Party. Pro-war defectors. Okay. And Newt Nelson, I believe he'd been serving for quite some time. Yeah, he'd been serving since 85, served 23. He died in office. A lot of these senators on this list died in office. Now we have another interesting one. The Senate election in Mississippi against Pat Harrison, who was the governor at the time, I believe. He was the House member. My mistake. James K. Valderman was the governor at the time, and then Edmund Knoll was also a governor. And this is pretty interesting. James K. Valderman ran for re-election, but he was defeated in the Democratic. Oh no, he was a senator at the time as well as a governor. My mistake. Served from 13 to 19. He ended up running for re-election, but he was defeated in the Democratic primary by Pat Harrison, which you don't see much of that anymore. It seems like that may actually happen in the 2026 South Dakota election with Larry Roden and Dusty Johnson. And as you can see here, he defeated Senator Leroy Percy in the Democratic. Wait, this was 1911. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, he stirred controversy by voting with a 6-person minority against the United States declaration of war in Germany, defying President Woodrow Wilson and the vast majority of Southern sentiments, so obviously people weren't too happy with him. He ended up losing. And then the official Senate election was, yeah, landslide 95%. I don't know why they have this one listed here instead. That may need to be fixed. And now we have another election versus Selden P. Spencer and Joseph W. Folk. Joseph W. Folk was the governor from '05 to '09. Selden P. Spencer was, I believe, yeah, he wasn't the incumbent. Oh yeah, William J. Stone was the senator. He died in 1918, and this guy was appointed, but he lost to Joseph W. Folk, and this I would have expected a bit closer of a race in Missouri at the time, but he ended up winning by a little over 6 points. And he served until 1925, where he died. A lot of these people die. Now, this is a really interesting race. We have the 1918 Senate election in Montana versus Thomas J. Walsh, who served from 13 to 33. And Oster M. Landstrom, I wonder if, oh yeah, he's former state representative, and Jeanette Rankin, which this was one of the main people of the women's suffrage movement from 1941 to 1943. She served in the House as well as 1917 to 1919. And she was the first woman elected to Montana. She served for one term, then she was elected again a couple decades later. She was a lifelong pacifist. She was one of 50 House members who opposed the declaration of war on Germany in 1917, and then she was the sole member of Congress to vote against the declaration of war of Japan following the attack of Pearl Harbor. And the last time the U.S. issued a global decree of war, I believe she also voted against the other decree of war, and here it doesn't have it listed, but I believe she voted against the other decree. And yeah, that is a pretty interesting lineage, and of course she fought very hard for the ability for women to have the right to vote, and that was a very important thing that ended up happening. And she helped found the American Civil Liberties Union and served as a vice president. She lived until 1973, one of the few senators that actually, not senator, excuse me, one of the few people here that actually had a decently long lifespan. And I believe there may be some more information about it here. Let's see. Any more information here? Oh, yes, he defeated incumbent Jacob Thorkelson, an outspoken anti-Semite in the July primary, and former Representative Jerry J. O'Connell in the general election. So he definitely seemed like a decently powerful politician at the time. Oh yeah, Rankin abstained when a war declaration against Germany and Italy came to a vote. And she realized that she all but ended her political career. Of course, she did not run for re-election. And asked years later if she ever regretted her action, Rankin replied, "Never. If you're against war, you're against war regardless of what happens. It's a wrong method of trying to settle a dispute." And John F. Kennedy would write about Rankin's decision. Few members of Congress have ever stood more alone while being true to a higher honor and loyalty. So she definitely stood steadfast to her principles, and I definitely respect her for that. She was definitely a very important member of the women's suffrage movement. She actually did pretty well. She got 23% of the vote. And now we have our next Senate election. The Senate election in Nebraska against John H. Moorhead and George W. Morris. And John H. Moorhead served Yeah, he was the governor from 13 to 17, and George W. Norris served from 13 to 43. So yeah, he served for quite a while. He ended up winning with 54% of the vote. And now we have the Senate special election in Nevada, and this was another interesting member. I don't think she has too much information on her. Anne Henrietta um, Martin was also another member of the women's suffrage movement, the first national chairman of the National Women's Party in 1916, and she ran for the Senate twice, losing in 18 and 20. And she lived to be 75, died in 51. Edwin W. Roberts served from 1911 to 19 as a representative, and Charles Belknap Henderson served from 18 to 21. Oh, yeah, this was a special election. Yeah, that makes sense. Now we have Henry W. Keyes and Eugene Elliott Reed, and he was a representative from New Hampshire from 13 to 15. Henry W. Keyes served from this will load. Yeah, 19 to 37. He served for a decent while, even during the era where Republicans had like 15 seats. And he ended up winning by a decent 6-point margin. This race was much closer versus George H. Morris and John B. Jameson. George H. Morris served from 18 to 33. Did he die in office? No, he did not die in office. Okay, I did not see the March 3rd deadline there. And now we have the Senate election in New Jersey against Walter E. Edds and George M. Lamont. I don't think there's too much information in this. Yeah, George M. Lamont was. Yeah, he didn't really have much on him. Walter Evans Edds served from. How long did he serve? 19 to 29? And he ended up winning by a decent 6-point margin. Now we have the New Jersey special, and this is something I found very weird about these elections, is there are multiple candidates that ran just to finish the term out of a special election that had like 4 months out of a special Senate term that had like 4 months left, and that did not make too much sense to me. And specifically that someone would put effort into winning this seat, but Dave Bard Sr. ended up winning, and he served for like 4 months. And William B. Walton and Albert B. Fall. He was a representative, and Albert B. Fall served from 12 to 21, so he had a decent tenure. Now we have F.M. Simmons and John Motley Moorhead II. I believe he had a pretty substantial role. He was a representative from 09 to 11 and North Carolina. And F.M. Simmons won with 60% of the votes, so a decent margin of victory. Well, not just decent, a landslide margin of victory. He served from 01 to 31. And now we have Oklahoma with Robert L. Owen and W.B. Johnson. He was the incumbent senator. He won with about, he won by about 15%. He served from 07 to 25, so he had a decent run. Now we have Charles L. McNary and Oswald West. Charles L. McNary is actually a pretty important voice, a pretty important senator. He served from 18 to 24, and he was the minority leader for over a decade, from 33 to 44. And he ended up dying in office, but he won his re-election here by a decent 12-point margin against Oswald West, who was, the governor from 11 to 15. Did McNary already hold this seat? I think he may have held a different seat. Okay, now we have the Senate election in Oregon against Frederick W. Mulkey and Martha Bean. Oh, this was another woman that ran. There's no information on her. She got 15%. Now we have Rhode Island with Lee Barnaby Colt and George F. O'Shaughnessy. And I believe this one may have been a flip. No, this one wasn't a flip. He ended up winning by a decent 5-point margin. He served for till 13 and 24. He died in office. Now we have the special Senate election in South Carolina. This is also a very interesting one. As you can see, there's Nathaniel Deal and Cole Blease. He was the governor of South Carolina. Nathaniel Dial had not held any other position beforehand, but he was considered a demagogue. political leader in the Democratic Party. And Blease had performed surprisingly well in the 1960 gubernatorial election, where it almost knocked off incumbent Governor Richard Irving Manning III. The death of Tillman and Zelaya ended all prospects of an epic battle, and the race became a contest between Blease and Nathaniel B. Daniel. And of course, he ended up winning here. What happened? Nope. Sorry about that, everybody. I do not know what just happened there. Okay. Yeah, the video's still going. Okay, good. He won by about 20% of the vote. He served from 19 to 25. Now we have William P. Pollock and Thomas H. Pebbles, and of course this did not pose too big of a challenge for him. Yeah, there's hardly any information here. William P. Pollock served from... I think he may have been a 2-year... No, he was a 4-monther. Never mind. And now we have Thomas Sterling and Orville V. Reinhardt versus W.T. Rafferty. Sterling won with 55% of the vote. He served from 13 to 25. I don't think there's too much information here. I may be wrong. The governor, Frank M. Byrne, ran against him, lost by about a 10-point margin. And now we have Henry Clay Evans versus John K. Shields in Tennessee. And yeah, there's not too much interesting here. Henry Clay Evans, yeah, he held office from 89 to 91. And John K. Shields was the governor from 13 to 25. I believe he may have served... Nope, he did not serve another term. Okay. And now we have Morris Shepard versus Webster Flagahan. Yeah, there was nothing here. Shepard won in a landslide. Oh, he was the minority whip. He served from 13 to 41, and he probably died in office. Yep, he died in office. Webster Flagahan. Oh, his father served as lieutenant governor. Now we have Thomas S. Martin. He won with 100% of the vote. He served from 85 to 19. David Elkins versus Clarence W. Watson, I believe. This may have been another flip. No, he served from 11 to 13. He came back versus Daniel Akins. Daniel Akins served 1 term, then he left from 19 to 25. Now we have the Senate election in Wisconsin versus Victor L. Berger, who was a founding member of the Social Democratic Party of America and the successor, the Socialist Party of America, Joseph E. DeVries. He was appointed to be the first chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, and Irving Linroot, who served at least from 18 to 27. Yeah, did not die in office. Oh, lived a couple decades after that. That's interesting. Wow, the pro-Bissen candidate barely got anything in this race. And then, yeah, Scattering got more. That's interesting. This was a decently close race, decently close 3-way race. He ended up winning by about 3% of the vote. And now we have John Eugene Osborne, who was the governor of Wyoming from 83 to 85, versus Francis E. Warren. He was served from 95 to 29, so he'd been the incumbent for a while and was also the former governor. He won by about a 7-point margin. I find it so weird this is not filled in. You would think they'd have the data from that. And we are completely done with the Senate elections for 1918. As you can see, there are a decent few flips here. Yeah, the Republicans get a total of 5 seats, and they only lost 1. Well, they get 6 seats, they only lost 1. And I hope you all enjoyed this. Please let me know what you all thought in the comments down below. And please like and subscribe, because every like we get, every subscription we get, every view we get is another wonderful person coming on this journey with us. And I also want to thank you so sincerely for 1,000 views on my latest sort and 800 views on the sort beforehand. That means so much to me. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.